It started in the small bookstore 2 blocks from home, the one that still smelled faintly of paper and dust, where the radio always played too softly to recognize the song. I was there that late morning because I didn't want to be at home. My neighbor, Amir, was out of town for a few days, and I'd been helping his mom with small things around the house, changing a light bulb, bringing in groceries. Nothing much, just enough to make me feel useful. When I walked into the bookstore that day, she was already there, sitting near the window, a paperback open, a half-finished cup of coffee beside her. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said, half a joke, half a truth. She looked up, surprised for a second, then smiled. "You said you liked this place." She remembered. I must have mentioned it in passing, weeks ago. She folded the napkin that had been under her cup, slowly, like she didn't want to look at me too long. It was such a small thing, but I noticed. I ordered coffee and sat down at the next table, pretending to read. Every now and then, our eyes met. Not in that deliberate way, more like bumping into each other's gaze and pretending not to notice. We talked about books at first, about how she used to come here before it changed owners. She said she liked the old chairs better, that they creaked like they were listening. I laughed quietly. She did too, then tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked down. There was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but not easy either. "You must be bored," she said, still looking at her book. "Not really. Young people don't spend mornings in bookstores. Guess I'm not very young then." She smiled again, that small, careful smile that didn't reach her eyes right away. I wanted to ask if she was lonely with her husband away, but the thought felt intrusive, like stepping into a room without knocking. So I just asked about the book she was reading. She told me it was about people who miss their chance with each other but still think about it years later. "Sounds sad," I said. "It's not sad," she replied softly. "It's just honest." Something about the way she said it made my chest feel tight. I looked down at my phone, pretending to scroll, but my thumb just hovered over the screen. No messages, no notifications, just quiet. When she stood up to leave, she placed the napkin, still neatly folded, beside her empty cup. I watched her hands as she reached for her coat. She had that deliberate way of moving, like she thought about every small action before she did it. "Do you need a ride?" I asked before I could stop myself. She paused, just for a breath too long. "I'm fine, thank you." Then after a beat, "Maybe next time." The doorbell chimed as she left, and the cold air rushed in for a second. I sat there, staring at the napkin she'd left behind. For some reason, I couldn't throw it away. Later that evening, when I walked past their house, her living room light was still on. Through the window, I saw her sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, screen glowing against her face. Mine buzzed just then, a single text. "Thank you for the coffee." I didn't know mornings could feel lighter. I didn't reply. I just stood there in the quiet street, reading the message again and again, not sure whether to smile or be afraid of what it meant. It had been 3 days since that text. I hadn't replied, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to step into that space without changing something. When I went over that evening to return Amir's toolbox, she opened the door before I even knocked twice. Her hair was tied back loosely. She looked surprised, but not unhappy to see me. "Oh," she said, "you didn't have to bring that right away." "I was passing by," I lied. She moved aside so I could step in. The house smelled faintly of cardamom and rain. She must have made tea. A small stack of folded laundry sat on the couch, a quiet sign of her evening routine. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. "It's still warm." I nodded, even though I'd already had 2 cups earlier. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed lowly. I leaned against the counter while she poured. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows. I noticed a faint scar near her wrist, pale and old. I wondered what story it carried, but didn't ask. "You've been quiet lately," she said, glancing over. I shrugged. "Just been thinking." "About?" I hesitated. "About that book you mentioned. The one about people missing their chance." She smiled faintly, her eyes still on the kettle. "It's easy to miss a chance. Harder to live with wondering if you did." That line lingered longer than it should have. We sat in the living room, the tea between us. She asked about university, my classes, my plans, but her tone wasn't polite. It was gentle, like she was listening for something between my words. At some point, I told her about my father, how he'd left when I was young, how I'd stopped waiting for his calls. I didn't mean to. The words just slipped out. She didn't say much in return, just reached out and touched my arm lightly, as if to steady the air between us. Her fingers rested there for half a second, a pause that felt longer than it was. Then she pulled back and looked away, pretending to sip her tea. "You know," she said softly, "people assume loneliness fades with age. It doesn't. It just becomes quieter." The clock ticked somewhere behind us. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. I wanted to tell her that she didn't seem lonely, that she seemed alive in the kind of way that made silence feel full. But I didn't. Instead, I asked if she needed help carrying the laundry upstairs. She hesitated, then nodded. Halfway up the stairs, she turned to say something, then stopped. I caught her gaze, a flicker of hesitation, maybe even fear, before she looked away again. When I handed her the last folded shirt, our fingers brushed. Not long enough to call it anything, but long enough to remember later. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I'd think later that night, staring at the ceiling. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next few days blurred into quiet routines. Morning light through her kitchen window. The sound of spoons against cups. Words that hovered, then fell away. I told myself I was just being a good neighbor. She told herself she just needed help with small things. Moving boxes, fixing the curtain rod, resetting the Wi-Fi. But even ordinary tasks began to feel less ordinary. That afternoon, I was helping her hang a frame in the hallway. A photo of her and Amir, maybe 10 years ago. He was still a kid, smiling, holding a kite. She looked the same, softer, maybe, but with that same calm presence. "You two were close," I said. She smiled faintly. "He used to follow me everywhere. Thought I knew how to fix everything." "You kind of do." She laughed quietly, but the sound felt caught halfway. Not playful, not serious, just suspended. When I stepped back to look at the frame, my hand brushed hers. Light, accidental. Neither of us moved right away. "Thank you," she said too quickly. "For what?" "For noticing things." Something in her tone made me look at her. For a second, the air shifted, that thin, invisible thread between distance and closeness pulling tight. But then, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, ordinary, but it broke the spell instantly. It was her friend, the woman from down the street. She came in talking fast, carrying a tray of something wrapped in foil. I stepped back, pretending to adjust the frame again. "Oh," the friend said, noticing me. "You're here again. Such a helpful boy." I smiled, tried not to look at her motherly smirk. "She's lucky to have you around while her husband's away," she added, too casually. The woman, my neighbor, froze for a second, then smiled, thin and polite. "He's just helping with a few things." I mumbled. Something about leaving soon. The friend chatted on, not noticing the quiet shift in the room. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt heavier. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding my breath. That night, I didn't go by, but the next morning, I found a small note in my mailbox, her handwriting, folded neatly. "Sorry about yesterday. She talks too much. Tea later." I read it twice before pocketing it. When I came over that evening, she was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, making tea. The silence between us was thicker now, not uncomfortable, just aware. "I shouldn't have let her say that," she murmured. "It's fine." "No, it's not." She looked up then, and the way her eyes caught mine. It was like standing too close to something you shouldn't touch. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Or maybe I might. The space between us felt measured in heartbeats. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the teacup. I almost reached out, almost, then stopped myself. She noticed, smiled faintly, as if we both knew what almost happened. Then she whispered, half to herself, "Maybe it's better if we don't." And before I could answer, she turned away, her voice soft, her back to me, leaving only the sound of 2 untouched cups cooling on the table. It had been days since that evening with the untouched tea. We both pretended it hadn't meant anything. But silence has a way of holding memory, and ours lingered in the smallest places. I'd see her sometimes watering plants in the morning, her expression unreadable. Other times, she'd wave from her kitchen window like everything was normal. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. One afternoon, she asked if I could walk with her to the nearby park, said she needed air, and it was safer not to go alone. I said yes too easily. The park was nearly empty, just a few scattered voices, the sound of distant traffic. We sat on a wooden bench that leaned slightly to one side. The late sunlight filtered through branches, tracing lines across her face. "You've been avoiding me," she said finally. Was I? Her eyes flicked toward me, then away. You were. I didn't know how to explain the quiet that had filled me since that night, the kind that feels like guilt, though you haven't done anything wrong. You're my son's friend, she said softly. That should mean something. It does, I said. That's why I didn't want to confuse things. She smiled, sad, almost grateful. You think I'm confused? I think we both are. For a while, neither of us spoke. She kept tracing the rim of her cup. She'd brought coffee from home in a thermos. I watched the way her fingers moved around the lid, gentle, uncertain. Finally, she said, you remind me of when I used to feel seen. Not for what I do, but just seen. That hit harder than I expected. I didn't mean to, I started. I know, she interrupted. That's what makes it worse. A group of kids ran past us, laughing loudly. The world felt suddenly too bright, too alive for what was happening between us. This still, suspended honesty. I keep thinking about that day in the bookstore, she said, eyes still forward. I looked down. So do I. I shouldn't, she whispered. I know. A long pause. Then, quieter, almost a confession. I think I'm afraid of how easy it feels when you're around. She said it hurt to admit. I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened. My hands wanted to move, to do something. Reach for hers, brush away the strand of hair that had fallen near her cheek. But I stayed still. You don't have to be afraid, I said, the words barely audible. She turned to me then. Really turned. Eyes steady, voice trembling just slightly. I'm 42, she said. You're 22. You don't think that matters. I met her gaze, heartbeat in my ears. It should. She stared at me a moment longer, as if deciding whether to stand or stay. Her breath caught. Then, so quietly it was almost lost under the wind. What happens if it doesn't? And before either of us could answer, the sound of her phone buzzing on the bench broke through the moment. We both looked down. Her husband's name lit up the screen. Neither of us moved. After that day in the park, things changed quietly, the kind of change that doesn't announce itself, just settles in like dust. She stopped texting first. I stopped finding reasons to stop by. It wasn't avoidance exactly. It was something smaller, sadder, hesitation disguised as control. When I passed her house in the evenings, the curtains were drawn. Sometimes I'd see the faint shadow of her moving through the rooms, her phone lighting up her face, but never toward me. One morning, I ran into her outside, carrying groceries from her car. She looked startled, like she hadn't prepared for this particular coincidence. Oh, hey, I said, voice too casual. She smiled, polite, distant. You've been busy. Yeah, you too, trying to be. There was something rehearsed in her tone. I didn't push it. Later, Amir came back from his trip. He knocked on my door, laughing, tired, full of stories. When he mentioned his mom, I listened too closely. He said she'd been quieter lately, that she'd started talking to his father again, long phone calls at night. Something in my chest twisted, though I pretended to just nod. A few days later, I saw her at the cafe, the same one from the beginning. She was sitting in her usual spot, but not alone. A man was across from her. Older, maybe her husband, maybe someone else. She laughed at something he said, but her eyes didn't match the sound. When she noticed me through the glass, her smile faltered, just for a moment. Then she looked away. That night, I drafted a message. I didn't mean to disappear. I just didn't know how to stay the same after that day. I stared at it for a long time. The typing cursor blinked like a heartbeat that couldn't decide whether to continue. Then I deleted it. Days passed. The silence between us became a routine of its own, familiar, heavy, almost comforting. One evening, I saw her sitting on her porch, reading in the fading light. I stood across the street, half hidden behind the tree. She looked up once, as if sensing something, but her eyes didn't find me. I wanted to cross over, to say anything. Ask if she ever thought about that bench, that near confession, that almost moment. But my feet stayed rooted. She turned the page, exhaled, and went back to reading. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. That night, I checked my phone again, no messages. Then I typed her name into the search bar, just to see the thread. Empty. She had deleted it. Weeks turned into a month. Amir went back to classes. The neighborhood went back to its slow rhythm. Morning bread truck, barking dog, kids shouting after school. Only she and I stayed out of sync, orbiting each other quietly. Then one evening, I saw her again. The sky was bruised with rain. I was coming home with a takeaway bag when I noticed her car parked slightly askew by the curb. The hood was open. She was standing beside it, rain misting her hair. I walked over before thinking. Need help? She looked up, startled. Then, a small, tired smile. Of course it had to break down today. I held the umbrella over her. We stood close, rain collecting on the edges. Her perfume mixed with the smell of wet asphalt. It's fine, I said, though I knew nothing about cars. You should get inside. She didn't move. You've been avoiding me, she said. It wasn't accusatory, just quiet truth. I thought it'd make things easier, I said. For who? Her voice was barely audible under the rain, but it reached. I don't know, I admitted. You? She looked at me then. Really looked, the way she used to in those pauses that felt like conversations. Her eyes softened. You think disappearing erases what happened? No, I said. It just helps me pretend it didn't matter as much as it did. A silence opened, wide and fragile. Rain tapping against metal. My hand is tightening around the umbrella handle. I told myself it was just loneliness, she said after a moment. That's what people like me do. We name things until they sound less dangerous. I exhaled. And did it work? She shook her head. No. Lightning flickered somewhere far off. The umbrella tilted slightly, and water trickled down between us. Her hand brushed mine as she steadied it. Neither of us pulled away. I don't want to complicate your life, she said softly. You already did. That made her smile, faint, sad. And yours? She asked. Did I? I hesitated, the truth lodged somewhere behind my teeth. Then, quietly, yeah, in a way I'm not sure I want to undo. She looked down, maybe to hide the tremor in her breath. Then she reached up, took the umbrella from my hand, and held it over both of us. Sometimes, she said, the hardest thing isn't saying no. It's not saying yes. We stood like that, two people who knew the line between right and real was thinner than rain. Finally, she stepped back. You should go? You'll get sick. I nodded, but didn't move. Then she reached out, just for a moment, and brushed her thumb over my sleeve, as if memorizing the feel of being this close again. Okay, she whispered. I swallowed hard, managed a nod. Okay. And just like that, she closed the car door, started the engine, and drove away into the gray. I stood there under the empty umbrella, listening to the sound of rain and engines, wondering if that okay was a goodbye or a promise. Time didn't rush to fix things. It just softened them. Months passed. The season changed twice. The bookstore replaced its wooden chairs. Amir moved to another city for work. The neighborhood quieted down. Fewer voices, slower mornings. And she was still there. Not in the same way. Not the charged pauses, not the invisible threads stretched too tight, but in a way that felt lived in, steadier. We found a rhythm again, almost by accident. A nod across the street. A shared grocery bag when her hands were full. Sometimes she'd stop by with leftover soup, or I'd mow her lawn without being asked. No big gestures. Just the kind that fill the small, hollow spaces people leave behind. It happened on a Sunday morning. The kind of still day where time moves differently. She called out from her porch, asked if I wanted tea. I said yes before thinking. In her kitchen, everything looked familiar. The soft hum of the fridge, the faint smell of cardamom. She poured 2 cups, hers still black, mine sweet. We sat at the table where months ago, 2 cups had gone untouched. Been busy? She asked. Trying to be, I said. She smiled. You still think too much. You still notice too much. It made her laugh, quietly. That same laugh that used to make me forget what I wanted to say next. There was no tension this time. Just an ease that felt earned. At some point, we took a walk. Same park. Same uneven bench. The frame of it had started to splinter, but it still leaned slightly to one side. We sat there, just like before, no confessions, no hovering questions. She watched the light filter through the leaves. You know, I drove by that day it rained, she said. I saw you standing there with the umbrella, even after I left. I smiled. I didn't realize you looked back. I always did. A pause. Then, softer. I think that was when I stopped being afraid. We didn't need to name what that was. The air already knew. I reached out, not bold, not uncertain, just natural, and brushed a raindrop from her sleeve. She didn't pull away this time. 8:47 a.m. That's what the small clock on her phone read when she finally looked at it. For some reason, the time stayed with me. Maybe because it felt ordinary enough to be real. We didn't talk about the past or about labels. Whatever this was, it wasn't about declarations. It was about quiet recognition. The way her hand stayed near mine on the bench. The way she looked at me, like we'd both weathered something and come out gentler for it. Later, when I walked her home, she stopped at the gate, turned slightly, and said, "Tea tomorrow?" "Only if it's black," I said. Her smile held that same calm certainty as before, a knowing that didn't need to be spoken aloud. And as she went inside, I thought about all the moments that had led here. The napkin, the bench, the rain. Small things that built something neither of us expected, but both quietly chose. I didn't feel paused anymore. I felt still. And maybe that's what love looks like when it finally stops running. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next? The ones that ache or the ones that heal?